Hi, and welcome to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks. I'm a retired 20-year veteran sergeant of the Los Angeles Police Department. I spent my entire 20-year career working in patrol within all four bureaus of the city of Los Angeles: Central Bureau, West Bureau, Valley Bureau, and South Bureau. I was also assigned to the infamous gang detail Operations South Bureau Crash. CRASH being the acronym for Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. Many of you who have been following me since day one know that I am not afraid or opposed to pulling the covers back, exposing that thin blue line, and speaking to you honestly and candidly about police culture, police training, and deciphering police code talk, that company speak that we hear from police chiefs when they have to try to explain away something that is really very difficult to justify. I'm also the author of an autobiography, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate, which chronicles my career on the Los Angeles Police Department, as well as the advocacy work that I began to get involved in 2014 after publishing my first book in 2013. You know what happened in 2014. There were a spate of deadly police encounters, starting with Eric Garner, Mike Brown here in Los Angeles, Ezell Ford, and then everything else that followed. Tamir Rice and Sandra Bland and Rayshard Brooks and George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and on and on and on. So I'll help you understand what it is that you can do to try to survive a police encounter. Holding court curbside will get you hurt, and I want to give you the tools and show you the red flags where an officer may be about to get aggressive with you. The goal being, at the end of that police encounter, for everyone to go home safely. And that's on both sides. Visit my website, cheryldorsey.com. That's CHERYLDORSEY.com, and read the first chapter of my autobiography, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate, as well as my next to be released book in the Black and Blue series, Black and Blue, The Creation of a Whistleblower. Also, those of you who've been following me for a while know I have a lot of isms. You know, your agreement is not required. And most recently, the one that was heard around the world, all skinfolk ain't kinfolk. I put those Cheryl Dorsey isms on t-shirts, crewneck shirts, and hoodies. Anyone interested in purchasing one of those items, you can do so at my website, cheryldorsey.com. as well. Now, let's get to it. On last week's podcast, I talked a little bit about the use of ketamine, a sedative that's also used on animals. Now listen, I know that ketamine, under the right circumstances, can be appropriate and is sometimes used in hospitals, but on the side of the road, curbside, because a police officer can't gain control of a suspect who seems to be either ignoring commands or resisting arrest, or whatever it is that police like to say when they justify unnecessary use of force. I talked about it last week in reference to Elijah McClain, and unbeknownst to me, a few days later, there was a segment on local radio channel, 60 Minutes to be exact, with regards to the use of ketamine, particularly there in Aurora, Colorado, by its police officers, by paramedics at the direction of the police officers on the Aurora Police Department, much as in the case of Elijah McClain. And so there have been several instances there in Aurora where police officers are demanding, if you will, getting real indignant when they don't inject an unruly, perceived uncooperative citizen who they've encountered the way that they did with Elijah McClain. There was a woman who was featured in that 60-minute segment, and if you have an opportunity to find it and see it, it would be helpful and very informative if you were able to view it again. But there was a mother of a young man, a biracial kid, who had been stopped, detained by police for some reason, And in the midst of that, actually what was happening, the reason that officers happened upon him in the first place is because the young man was in the midst of a diabetic seizure. Officers thought, well, because, he was black, partially, and that was enough to get him a dose of ketamine. They shot him up. They said he was being uncooperative. They thought, like they do all black men, that, somehow he had superhuman strength and might have been under the influence of drugs. Thankfully, this young man didn't die, but he did spend several days in the hospital as a result of this ketamine injection. And so what's so problematic about this, the use of this drug by police officers, is number one, they don't know the history of the individual. They don't know what medication this person might be taking that might adversely react to a sedative like ketamine. And more importantly, I told you on last week, I saw some zookeepers give it to a 8-foot to 10-foot long, 300-pound Komodo dragon to calm him down. And so now there's much being said. I do know now there's an update with regards to the use of ketamine in Colorado. Authorities have temporarily banned it. In Minnesota, paramedics are speaking out against police officers trying to force them there to use ketamine. And in particularly, there's a former paramedic with the emergency medical services in Woodbury. This is a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota. And this gentleman is a whistleblower. His name is Joseph Baker. He's 32 years old. Now, he's a former paramedic for a reason, right? And what happened with Joseph Baker is that he felt pushed out of his job after refusing to administer ketamine in an incident back in September of 2019. Prior to that, he had to give ketamine injections on at least 3 other occasions as a Woodbury EMS. And he recalls a trigger-happy mentality on that department around the use of ketamine on certain individuals. In 2018, a year before, it had been found that ketamine used by Minneapolis Police Department officers had sharply increased in just a few years. Before 2015, there were an average of about 4 mentions of the use of ketamine per year in police reports of detainees. By 2017, 2 years before Joseph Baker was run out on a rail, by 2017, there were reported 62 uses of ketamine by police officers. Now, this is according to their deputy police chief, Art Knight, over there on the Minneapolis Police Department. There's a medical professional who says that actual victims of ketamine injections generally have a hard time arguing that, that's if they survive, that somehow this should not have happened to them. They should not have been forcibly injected with this thing because, of course, I always say great deference is given to what an officer says. And when an officer, 3 or 4 or 6 of them say that, the person was unruly, uncooperative, resisting, a lot like what we hear from the Attorney General over in Aurora, Colorado, with regards to Elijah McClain over there. The Attorney General said, well, Elijah started all this. He escalated the encounter when he refused to stop and comply with the officer's orders. And so this is an Attorney General saying that. And this is supported by a medical professional who says citizens have a hard time making a strong case against why they were injected by paramedics in the first place. Police officers outsource these injections to the paramedics, and then paramedics can plausibly claim that the arrestees were being belligerent and that they presented a, quote, safety concern based on misrepresentations by the officers. Again, Elijah McClain situation, the officer lied, we now know, and said that Elijah had grabbed his gun in the midst of this big, hairy, scary fight that they were having with him when he displayed this superhuman strength at 5'6", 140 pounds. So officers point the finger at paramedics when things go sideways. Paramedics point the finger back at the officers and say, hey, officers directed me to do this. What makes this different now is that we actually have a paramedic in Joseph Baker who's saying, hey, this is BS. This should not be happening. In the case of Joseph Baker over in Minneapolis, he refused to inject someone who was having a mental illness episode. And in so doing, by the time he got back to the station, he noticed that a sergeant of all things, Sergeant Tom Ehrenberg on the Minneapolis Police Department, showed up at the station and was jamming him up in the corner and wanted to know, dude, what's up? Baker said as a result of this, he felt pressure and decided to leave his post. He was, before he left, placed on a progressive improvement plan, which kind of infers that somehow he was a disciplinary problem. He was accused, allegedly, according to Baker, of being insubordinate. Now, I don't know how a paramedic can be insubordinate to a police officer. I guess we'll find out when that lawsuit that he's filed is settled, if that's even a thing. But that's what they said to him. And I guess it was easier for him to just leave and go to another agency and not have to put up with pressure from Sergeant Tom Ehrenberg and others on the Minneapolis Police Department who were not in agreement with his medical assessment that injecting ketamine may not necessarily be the best thing to do. So in 2020, ketamine was temporarily banned for use by officers on the Aurora Police Department. That's just a temporary ban. We'll have to wait and see what happens ultimately, but I am particularly bothered and will continue to report on this as I learn more information, because I am of the belief that ketamine and other sedatives should not be used for law enforcement purpose, and mere non-compliance or a belief, a perception, although unsubstantiated, that somehow there is a legitimate medical reason to give someone what we saw on a video clip of a young man in Aurora being injected calm down juice is what the officer said when he referred to it. Hey, dude, can we just give him some calm down juice, something to make him go to sleep? And it rolled off the officer's tongue just so freely and so easily. And there were many, many people around, other officers, other paramedics were on scene. And this officer over on Aurora Police Department just said, hey, can you give him something to put him to sleep? In a 4-day period in Aurora last August, when 23-year-old Elijah had been injected and killed, there was another gentleman. He was 25, and coincidentally, his name too was Elijah McKnight. And they were both given doses of ketamine in separate police incidents. We know that McLean later went into cardiac arrest and died a few days after being injected. McKnight was luckier in that he was only hospitalized on life support for a few days. However, he did survive that incident. So I am totally opposed to police officers using ketamine, and I will continue to speak out, and hopefully the powers that be, particularly this new administration coming in and those that are being appointed into positions of authority over police use of force. This needs to be a nationwide ban, not just city to city, state to state, because Aurora, Colorado is not the only department. We know that. We know that it goes on in Minnesota, and it also occurred in Texas. There was a gentleman who lost his life. So this needs to be a nationwide ban, and I will continue to speak out in opposition to police officers forcing paramedics to inject civilians, mostly black folks, with ketamine. There's an update on an LAPD fatal shooting involving an LAPD officer. I've also spoken about this previously. Female police officer by the name of Toni McBride, daughter of Detective Jamie McBride, who is known to have been involved in at least 6 police shootings himself, either directly or indirectly. And so his spawn, Toni, got her first kill. 5 years on the job, it's reported. And earlier this year, she engaged in a fatal shooting of I think he was 38 years old, Hispanic man by the name of Daniel Hernandez. Now, the officers responded to a radio call of a traffic collision. Daniel Hernandez was seen outside of his car waving around a box cutter. And so I'm just going to say this, because the police commission met on yesterday, December 15th, regarding this deadly use of force by Toni McBride, and she had fired 6 shots at Daniel Hernandez. And I said, when I was interviewed by a reporter over at the LA Times, which you can find online, I said it was out of policy. I said that at least the last 4 shots were out of policy. I reluctantly give her the first 2 because the way she presented her perception of the incident is that Daniel Hernandez was charging her. But when you look at the video, he takes 2 steps. There's significant distance between the 2 of them. And again, if deadly force is to be used as a last resort, what's wrong with putting a little more distance between you and Daniel, getting a position of cover and concealment, and see what he does? Now, LAPD Police Chief Mike Moore says, hey, look, all 6 shots I'm good with. What are you talking about, Police Commission? Daniel Hernandez could have hurt bystanders. And Chief, he could not have hurt bystanders because listen, he had been in possession of that box cutter for minutes, and how many, I don't know, before the officers arrived. So why is it now all of a sudden when Toni McBride shows up, we can't wait? He needs 6 rounds to put him down to prevent bystanders from being hurt. I just have a problem with it. Obviously, the family of Daniel Hernandez has a problem with it. And apparently, the Los Angeles Police Commission has a problem with it because they said rounds 5 and 6 were out of policy, unnecessary. Daniel Hernandez was already down on the ground. Now, Toni McBride's version of the story, and she's sticking to it. And of course, the Police Protective League, where her father is a director, is in full agreement and supporting her bullshit. They haven't seen a shooting of a Black or Hispanic man, woman, or child that they can't get excited about, seemingly, and this one too, of course, because of Toni McBride's relationship, daughter of Jamie McBride, with 6 shootings under his own little belt. So they're in agreement, and they find no fault. They said that, well, listen, it was a good shooting. Daniel Hernandez, after the first 2 shots, you hear a pause. Toni is doing just what we were trained to do, which is reassess the threat. And they said in that moment, Daniel Hernandez attempted to get up. Again, her perception, she thought he might hurt bystanders if he was to get to his feet. And so she fired rounds 3 and 4. He's still on the ground, and then she pauses and reassesses and fires rounds 5 and 6. So the police commission gave her rounds 1 through 4, 5 and 6 out of policy. He's down on the ground. I say, well, if he attempted to get up, could we have waited maybe just another second or two, Toni, to see if in fact he could get up, because he had already been hit with the first 2 rounds. Deadly force is to be used as a last resort. What's the hurry? What's the urgency? He's down on the ground. Give him another second or two before you fire rounds 3 and 4. But she did. And she's got the support of her dad, Mr. 6 shootings under his belt, and the Los Angeles Police Protective League. And then, of course, since LAPD Police Chief Mike Moore says, hey, all 6 rounds were okay by me, you can understand that whatever he decides and however he decides to adjudicate this out of policy shooting for rounds 5 and 6 tends to make me think that it will be very minimal, that he will mitigate it somehow. And I don't even know how all of this works, understanding that AB 392 passed, which means an officer, can only use deadly force when necessary, and that an officer has to address and account for every round and what was going on prior to, during, and after. But when you have a police chief who has total autonomy over his department, and when you understand that Los Angeles Police Commission makes a recommendation, the fatal shooting of Daniel Hernandez, much like the fatal shooting of Ezell Ford back in 2014, out of policy according to the police commission that was constituted at that time, and then Police Chief Charlie Beck said, thank you, Police Commission. And then he went on the roof of the administration building and told LAPD officers, you have my support. It did nothing to the officers that shot and killed Ezell Ford. They're still out there. They live to offend again. And, I guess we'll just wait and see if they get involved in another police shooting because someone didn't come here, didn't comply, didn't turn around and submit to their orders. We'll see if little Jamie's spawn, Toni McBride, now that she's got 1 shooting under her belt and she's only got 5 years on the job, so sheesh, she could get to 6 pretty quick here. I believe her father was at 6 shootings by the time he had 11 years on the job. And so we'll see. And listen, understand this about Toni McBride, because she is a described media influencer, described this way in an article as a, air quote, dolled up sharpshooter. She is a police model spokesperson, if you will, for a company, a couple of different companies. She models for guns and t-shirts and hats. And one of the places where she does some of this media influencer type modeling is a company called Side Action Apparel. Side Action Apparel was founded in 2016 by an LAPD veteran officer. He's got 20 years on the job. His name is Danny Arona. That's his business. And basically, you know, the way it's reported and the way I see it is that Side Action Apparel, by their selling of t-shirts and hats, really do seem to glorify police violence, police deadly use of force. They kind of even revel and celebrate it on some of their items. And they use little Toni because, listen, she's a cute girl. She's got a cute little body, and she dresses, you know, like you would expect a model to, little itty bitty shorts and crop tops, and shows her little tiny petite physique, as she's got, you know, bazookas shoved down the front of her pants. What's not to like about it? She's also come up with some kind of a coin through one of these affiliations, and according to an LAPD Captain Stacy Spell, who is the commanding officer over at Media Relations Division, she said that Side Action doesn't have a licensing agreement with LAPD, and some of the things that they are putting out there and charging people for is in a violation. However, they're still doing it. They've come out with some kind of a coin that features Toni McBride's LAPD badge, something she should not be able to do. She doesn't own that badge, and they don't have a licensing agreement to use an LAPD badge. But nonetheless, they've come out with some coin that they just showcased on her Instagram account, and they're charging folks $25 for this coin. And according to LAPD Captain Stacy Spell, this challenge coin, that's what they're calling it, a challenge coin, it infringes on the LAPD badge trademark. Now, if Captain Stacy Spell knows that Side Action Apparel is infringing on LAPD trademark by using its badge, and that their own officer, Danny Arona, is behind it, the question that begs to be answered is, well, what's LAPD Chief Mike Moore doing about this? Because listen, Captain Spell isn't knowing this and not sharing it with the police chief. I promise you, Mike Moore knows. And so, I don't know. Is Mike Moore complicit in all of this foolishness? They're selling not only this challenge coin, but also apparel with a redesigned Corona beer logo on it, allegedly, that says, "Light them up." This is a t-shirt that says "Light them up." And I guess these are the kinds of items that you can find little Toni McBride wearing. A t-shirt that says "Light them up," as she's holding, you know, a bazooka in each hand. There's another t-shirt that Side Action Apparel sells that says "Hold the line, 40 mm, stand by." And this is an alleged reference to less lethal munitions. And we know that less lethal munitions, while they may not cause death, they can certainly cause some pretty significant injuries, and have done so over the last several months. In September, there was a demonstration, and one of the demonstrators was hit in the groin by a foam projectile and then had to be rushed to an emergency surgery, where this person suffered some pretty significant injuries to his groin area. There was another injured individual who had been shot with a less lethal munition during the Lakers celebration after their win in October. This person sustained a significant injury from less lethal munition that wound up putting that person in the hospital and a few others. There were foam rounds that had been deployed on protesters or celebrants during this Laker win back in October. One of them was hit in the eye by a foam round. And I'm presuming that this person lost their eye, because it says in the report that a foam round exploded someone's eyeball. And there was another person who lost over 7 teeth after being hit with less lethal munitions during that same celebration. And so here you have LAPD officer Danny Arona celebrating with these t-shirts and hats. There's another item that he sells, and on it, it's a hat, and it says "Running and Gunning." Now, you guys have heard me talk before about police officers, and I'm talking about LAPD specifically because that's what I know, but we've seen video of officers celebrating during these protests when they're using less lethal, either stick time or bean bags or whatever it is that they're shooting at folks and then celebrating later because they've, been able to get away with it and not much be done. And so here you have an LAPD officer who sells garments that celebrate that stuff. There's also allegedly a t-shirt that Side Action Apparel sells. And on this t-shirt, there's an iron patch and it says Saint Gates, patron saint of civil unrest. Now, this is a reference to former LAPD Police Chief Daryl Gates, was pretty much run out on a rail after the 1992 riots and was reported to have said to a Senate hearing that casual drug users ought to be taken out and shot. And so these are the cowboys. These are the Billy Badass. These are the elephant hunters that you hear me talk about. I would imagine that those are a lot of the folks who follow little Toni McBride on her IG as a media influencer. Those are the folks who probably are interested in buying her challenge coin with her LAPD badge on the back of it and some kind of 4-leaf clover on the other side, as well as t-shirts celebrating, reveling in someone being hit by a less lethal munition that caused their eyeball to explode and another who lost a testicle as a result of being hit in the groin. So all of this under the command of LAPD Police Chief Mike Moore. And so when he comes on TV, family, and he starts clutching his pearls and acts surprised by the shenanigans that go on that's alleged to have occurred by his officers in the midst of a protest, when he acts surprised, you know he's being intellectually dishonest because none of this stuff could happen. And he's the police chief and not know about it. During my time on LAPD, I had an opportunity to work on loan for a couple of months to press relations. Now they call it media relations, where Captain Spell is. And I know for a fact when I was up there, it was our job to go through the news and cut out articles. It was a pretty cool job, as a matter of fact, for a sergeant of police to just read newspapers and cut out articles all day and do a cut and paste and put them on papers and give them to the police chief so that he could read and know what's going on. And that's why I tell you, none of this is happening in a vacuum. LAPD Police Chief Mike Moore knows about it. He's good with it. He knows that little Toni McBride is a, quote, dolled up sharpshooter, spokesperson, advocate for Side Action Apparel and the celebratory items that they sell to their customers, glorifying police deadly use of force. So no one should be surprised when LAPD Police Chief Mike Moore says that 6 shots to a man who's down on the ground makes sense to him. I'll let you know how this thing is finally adjudicated. I expect a slap on the wrist because that's what exactly the police chief can do. He can decide that this is just a training issue and perhaps Miss Toni McBride needs to spend a few more hours at the bazooka range where she is a spokesperson model. And yeah, I'll let you know what happens. Over in Louisiana, there are some attorneys who are highlighting similarities between 2 alleged beatings of Black men by Louisiana state troopers. There's a state trooper recently who has been accused of beating a gentleman by the name of Aaron Bowman. Trooper Jacob Brown, back in May of 2019, viciously beat Aaron Bowman with a flashlight. Now, while we do carry flashlights, and certainly they were used as tools of mayhem back in the day, that's not what a flashlight is meant for. And so Trooper Jacob Brown's got some splaining to do. Trooper Jacob Brown savagely beat Aaron Bowman with a flashlight. Thankfully, Mr. Bowman didn't die. This occurred just a few weeks after another Black man, Ronald Green, had died at the hands of Louisiana state troopers. Both Aaron Bowman and Ronald Green were beaten with a flashlight. Trooper Jacob Brown is the trooper who was involved in the Aaron Bowman beating. He comes from Troop F, which is in Monroe, Louisiana. He has been arrested for striking Mr. Bowman 18 different times with this flashlight. And then, of course, you know what he did. He tried to hide that video from his superiors, showing the reason why, what led up to the 18 strikes. And ultimately, I'm sure Mr. Bowman was arrested for something, because, you know, when they put hands on you or 18 strikes from a flashlight, you got to go to jail for something. These injuries as a result of the 18 strikes with the flashlight resulted in a cut on Mr. Bowman's head that required stitches. He suffered a fractured arm and broken ribs. And so now Trooper Jacob Brown is facing 1 count each of aggravated second-degree battery and malfeasance in office. He right now remains on administrative leave. Regarding Ronald Green, who I have spoken about in a prior podcast, the officer that was involved in that incident, coincidentally, hours after it was announced that he was going to be arrested, was involved in a solo car accident and killed. So the state trooper responsible for the death and the savage beating of Ronald Green won't have to face a jury of his peers. He's got some splaining to do somewhere else. In both instances, the state police did not open an investigation into either case until they received notification of a lawsuit accusing both troopers of excessive force, and then, of course, lying about the use of excessive force. What's problematic about that is that the state police investigate other police agencies and their shootings. And so if you've got state police troopers who are unethical, lack integrity, and are known to be proven liars, how then can that agency be trusted to investigate police shootings of other critical incidents involving other law enforcement agencies across the state? I suggest they can't. And so that too is being discussed. In the case of Ronald Green, the trooper who was involved in that solo car accident, his name was Chris Hollingsworth. And as I stated, he died in a single car crash. That was back in September. Several days later, there was another trooper from, I guess, the same troop, Troop F. This trooper, his name is Caleb Reeves. Now, Caleb Reeves is the son of a former agency head over there, Colonel Kevin Reeves. Trooper Caleb Reeves is the son of Colonel Kevin Reeves, and he was responding to a call when he rear-ended a vehicle. Caleb, on his way to a call, rear-ended a vehicle with sufficient enough force to leave a child and teen who were in the back seat of this vehicle dead from the impact. As of now, it's unknown whether or not Caleb Reeves will be disciplined for his role in that particular crash. If you have your cart connected to the right horse, well, you can get the homie hookup. Now, Caleb's father, Colonel Kevin Reeves, spent decades in Troop F over in Monroe, Louisiana, before they appointed him to be a superintendent in 2017. Now, Colonel Kevin Reeves has since stepped down. He retired from his position in late October, said it had nothing to do with his son getting involved in this fatal on-duty car crash. It was time to go. He retired. So, but, you know, you can't unknow what they know over there in Troop F about Caleb's relationship to a former high-ranking superintendent from Troop F. I'll keep you posted if I see more about that. The U.S. Department of Justice has launched a concurrent federal civil rights investigation into the death of a Black man by the name of Casey Goodson, Jr. Deputy Jason Meade, with 17 years on the Franklin County Sheriff's Office, was assigned to a U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force. And in so doing, being a part of this task force, somehow he encountered Casey Goodson, 22 years old, as he was about to enter his family home over in Columbus, Ohio. This happened back on December the 4th. Casey Goodson Jr. had put his keys in the back door. He was about to enter the home, And there's no body cam footage to show because that department doesn't have any. But what is reported is that this Jason Meade, Deputy Jason Meade, decided somehow that Casey Goodson might be involved in the fugitive task force hunt. He wasn't. He hadn't done anything illegal, but Deputy Jason Meade focused in on this young man and wound up shooting him as he was attempting to enter the back door of the family home. Deputy Jason Meade opened fire and shot Casey Goodson Jr. multiple times as he unlocked the family door and fell on the floor in front of his little brother and his grandmother. The coroner's investigation has preliminarily indicated Casey Goodson Jr.'s death as a homicide. And what's important about this is not Deputy Jason Meade's first rodeo. In March of 2019, he received an oral reprimand. In other words, not even a paper penalty, just an oral reprimand for violating rules and regulations for deploying his taser on a suspect. And then, of course, he didn't notify his supervisor or communications about that unnecessary use of force, a taser. That was just last year in 2019. And, when these officers go unchecked, when there's no accountability, they live to offend again. And so because of that, Deputy Jason Meade, part of a U.S. fugitive task force, now feels invincible, I would imagine. And of the opinion that, everybody's in agreement with his foolishness. In 2010, he received, according to records, a less than satisfactory mark on his performance evaluation. It says that it was noted on his evaluation that he's content with only doing the bare minimum to get by. And so in this case, perhaps the bare minimum meant not really doing his due diligence with regards to who is it that I'm looking for, and is Casey Goodson Jr. even involved in this warrant that they were serving as they're looking for this fugitive. Casey Goodson Jr. wasn't involved. He had nothing to do with the task force that was pursuing whoever they were pursuing. And so, yeah, Jason Meade, he does just enough to get by. And in this case, it costs Casey Goodson Jr. his life. So, when you don't hold officers accountable, when you minimize and excuse, you mitigate bad behavior, when you look the other way as the head of an organization, officers live to offend again. And it's not until there's a death and it makes national news that now everybody somehow, starts clutching their pearls and wondering, how did this happen? How did we get here? I'll keep you posted on the Casey Goodson Jr. fatal shooting and report any additional information as it becomes known. That's it for now, family. Please do stop by. For those of you who are listening to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks podcast for the first time, stop by and visit my website, cheryldorsey.com. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Sergeant Dorsey Speaks, and follow me on Instagram, Sergeant SGT Cheryl Dorsey. Until next time, family, be good and be safe.
You have been listening to the Sergeant Dorsey Speaks podcast, produced by the Get Global Network. Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey is a television commentator, social justice advocate, and is also well known for her book, Black and Blue, Creation of a Social Advocate, an autobiography of her 20-year career as a Black woman on the Los Angeles Police Department. The book details what she learned as an LAPD insider. Sergeant Dorsey can be contacted through her website, cheryldorsey.com, or via any of her social media sites like YouTube and Facebook. Take the time to subscribe to her YouTube channel and also subscribe to this podcast via major podcast networks like iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Podcast, and many others. The podcast is also available on wireless speaker systems like Alexa and Sonos.